that 90% of the thoughts that you think are the same thoughts as the day before. As long as you're thinking the same, more than likely your life or your health is going to stay the same, because the same thoughts lead to the same choices. The same choices lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences. And the same experiences produce the exact same emotions. And those same emotions influence our very same thoughts. And our biology, our neurocircuitry, our neurochemistry, our hormones, our gene expression stays the same because we're the same. And the principle is nothing changes in our life until we change. So then, the principle in neuroscience says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you keep thinking the same thoughts, making the same choices, doing the same things, reproducing the same experiences that stamp the same networks of neurons into the same patterns, all for the familiar feeling called you, in time, we begin to hardwire our brain and condition our body emotionally to become more of a subconscious program. So 95% of who we are by the time we're in our mid-30s or middle life is a set of memorized behaviors, unconscious habits, automatic emotional responses, hardwired thoughts, beliefs, perceptions that function automatically. So if you believe in that idea, then if you wake up in the morning and you think about your problems and your brain is a record of the past, those problems are connected to certain people and certain objects and things at certain times of places. The moment you start thinking about your problems, really much you're remembering your past. And every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So the moment we feel unhappy, the moment we feel anxiety, the moment we feel unworthy, now our body's in the past. So thoughts become the language of the brain and feelings become the language of our body. And how we think and how we feel is our state of being. But it only takes a thought and a feeling, an image and an emotion, a stimulus and a response, and you're starting the conditioning process, and you're conditioning your body emotionally into the known, into the past. You do that enough times, the body's so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that person's fabricating by thought alone. The body's believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, the research on epigenetics says that the environment signals the gene. Okay, well, the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion. So then the person is signaling the same genes in the same way because the body's believing it's living in the same environment. So the trauma, the betrayal, the loss, the drama, whatever it is, the diagnosis that causes a person to feel certain emotions, the majority of the emotions that we feel, and you know this because you're an expert on it and you write about it, are derived from the hormones of stress. And stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis, right? So it makes sense then that when you perceive a threat or a danger in your life, you turn on that primitive nervous system and you're mobilizing all your body's resources for some threat, real or imagined. No problem if it's short term. But the chronic long-term effects of the hormones of stress downregulate genes and create disease. Now, the problem is we can turn on that stress response just by thought alone. We can think about our problems. We can imagine the worst-case scenario in our life. We can capture bitter memories and do that over and over and over again. And in effect, if we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, and the science says that stress can push the genetic buttons that create disease, then our thoughts can make us sick. Well, the question is, if our thoughts can make us sick, is it possible then our thoughts can make us well? And that's kind of my interest.
So much to unpack there. There's a couple of statistics you mentioned there, that 90% of the thoughts we think are the same as the day before. I think you also said that 95% of who we are by the age of 35 are a set of memorized behaviors. And those two things really stood out to me because as a medical doctor, a lot of the things that I try and do with my patients is to help them make change in their life, let's say change their lifestyle. And a lot of the time, those behaviors that they engage in are very short-lived. They get super motivated, they do it for a few weeks, but then they often revert back to where they were before. And I'm wondering if those two statistics help me understand why that is, because actually if we're not changing at source the programming in our brain in terms of how we think and how we approach the world, then it's going to be very hard, isn't it, to actually change those downstream behaviors in the long term?
Absolutely. And listen, you know this as well as anybody. I mean, chronic diseases require a lifestyle change. And change is an interesting concept. So the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. And the moment you decide to make a different choice, get ready, because you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. There's going to be some uncertainty. You're not going to be in the known. You're stepping out into the unknown. You're doing something differently. And the body, which has been conditioned to be the mind, the servant is now the master. So the body loves the familiar known. It loves the same suffering. It loves the same pain. It loves the same unworthiness. It's been conditioned that way for years on end. It really is running the show. So the moment you step out into the unknown, the body goes, wait a second, I'd rather feel guilty than this feeling of the unknown because I can't predict my future. So the body starts influencing the mind, and we start to hear this chatter in our head that says, well, I can start tomorrow. Tomorrow's a better day. You really don't feel like it today. Why don't you just have one piece of cake? You're a loser. It's your parents' fault. It's your ex's fault. It's your culture's fault, whatever it is. And if we accept, believe, and surrender to that thought as if it's the truth, that's an old circuit in the brain. That thought will lead to the same choice, which will lead to the same behavior, which will create the same experience, which will produce the same feeling or emotion. The person says, well, this feels right to me. No. That feels familiar. Crossing the river of change, going from the old self to the new self, there is a neurological, a biological, a hormonal, a genetic death of the old self. There's pruning going on. There's inhibition going on. We're no longer releasing the same stress hormones that give us the arousal. And so if there's three types of stress: physical, chemical, and emotional. Physical stress being trauma, injuries, accidents, falls. Chemical stress, viruses, bacteria, pesticides, pollutants, toxins, hangovers, whatever. Emotional stress, that's the big one. That's family tragedies, second mortgages, single parenting, 401ks, whatever it is. It tends to be then that the difficult one to manage really is our emotional stress. So if you can help people to get more physically balanced, more chemically balanced, and to become more emotionally balanced, then the effects of their personal change will be expedited.
Yeah.
And there'll be a longer duration. So the person sees you for 6 months, they start a great program, they start making the right choices, and they start feeling better. And then once they make the wrong choice, then it's a downward spiral back to the old unconscious habits and emotional condition. They feel unworthy again. And they return back to your clinic, or they return back to your consultation, and they come back with the same exact conditions. And the simple solution is, because you return back to the same personality, and you're feeling the same emotions, and your body's back to believing it's in the same environmental condition. So if your personality creates your personal reality, and I believe that, and your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, then the present personality who's listening to this podcast has created the present personal reality called their life. Not your ex, not your parents, not your boss. You create your life. So it makes sense then, if you wanted to create a new personal reality, you'd have to change your personality. In other words, if you want to change your life, you have to change, and nothing changes in your life until you change. So then this first step in change then, 95% of who we are is a set of unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. Then the first step is to become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, to become so aware of how you behave. Do you complain? Do you blame? Do you make excuses? Do you judge? Are you aggressive? And then look at the emotions. What is this emotion I'm feeling? Wow, this is guilt. This is sadness. This is victimization. This is unhappiness. Name it. So now you're so conscious of it that you don't go unconscious and return back to the same self. And how many times do we have to forget until we stop forgetting and start remembering? That's the moment of change.
Yeah. I mean, it's so powerful. There's two key elements there that I'd love to dive into a little bit. There's awareness and personality. On personality, one of the deep realizations in my own life over the past few years has been that our personalities, much of our personality at least, is not fixed. Like many people think that, oh, the way I am is the way I am. And what I've learned through the research, but also through my own personal experience of life, is that often our personality is not who we are, it's who we had to become. So, for example, for most of my life, most of my friends and family would say that I'm intensely competitive. I can't stand to lose. I will win. I will do what I need to do to win at all costs. But I know full well that now comes from a feeling of lack. That came from a feeling of lack inside, that I developed this idea as a child that actually I'm only loved, I'm only worthy when I get full marks or when I'm a success, right? So therefore, of course, being competitive absolutely serves that purpose, because if you're competitive, you're going to keep reinforcing that, yeah, you're going to then succeed and you're going to get that external validation which you feel you need. But as I've become aware of that, and that's where the awareness piece I think comes in, for me, I've become acutely aware that actually, no, I can change that. Actually, that's not fixed for life. And these days, I'm not competitive. I'm competitive in a different way. Like, it's not because I need to succeed because that says who I am and that's a reflection of who I am. It's because, no, I'm no longer coming from a place of lack. I'm coming from a place of love now where, yeah, I still want to do well, but it's not a reflection of my self-worth. So I've really experienced that you can change.
Right. Well, then the fundamental thing then is to realize then that there's great science to show that we are not hardwired to be a certain way for the rest of our lives, and we're not doomed by our genes, that we're marvels of adaptability and change. Now, here's the challenge, though. The challenge is that most people wait for crisis or diagnosis before they make up their mind to change. And my message is, why wait? So then if your personality creates your personal reality and you become conscious that in lack or in separation, the game to play when you're living in three-dimensional reality is that you have to do something to get what you want. So then you have the thought of wanting something, right? You want a new career, you want to succeed in something, you want a new relationship, you want to heal. That thought of whatever that experience is, your mind actually predicts it somewhere in the future. And you say, if I work really hard, if I sacrifice a certain number of things, if I save a lot of money, I can go on this vacation or have this experience. And some people wait for the experience to occur. And when the experience occurs, the payoff is the emotion in three-dimensional reality. But the distance between the thought of what you want and the experience of having it, between cause and effect, between one point of consciousness, I'm conscious that I'm competitive, and another point of consciousness, can I change that, is called time. So everything in three-dimensional reality takes time, and we experience separation until the event happens, and then we feel the emotion. Well, that's great. But the fundamental quality of a person's personality who's competitive, once they have that experience, then they're going to compete for the next thing they want. And there's nothing wrong with that, because when we're matter trying to change matter, of course, we're going to use the principles. We're going to control, we're going to predict, we're going to compete, we're going to fight for it, we're going to work harder, we're going to manipulate, we're going to do anything we can to produce an outcome. And when we have the experience then produces the emotion. Well, the question is then people become so reliant on the experience to change their emotional state. They need something outside of them to change their internal state. And so if I said to somebody, hey, why are you so unhappy today? They would say, I'm unhappy because of that person or that circumstance. Yeah. And what that really means is that person or that circumstance is actually controlling the way you feel and the way you think.
If you enjoyed that clip from my podcast, here's another powerful clip that is really going to help you with your health and happiness.
Everybody has to learn how to do this. Your whole life gets better. Learning to control your nervous system will change everything. The foundational practice that I truly believe every person should do every day is